Hi, this is David Kroodsma with Hub Culture, and I'm joined by Eileen Claussen, the president of the Pew Center on Global Climate Change, and we are here at the Forum for Communicating Climate Change at COP16. Eileen, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I have a lot of questions for you, but here we're talking about communicating climate science, and you spoke today about the expectations of the press and how they've done handling the COP, and I want to know how you feel like they've done it at last COP and at this COP.
Well, I think there was a huge problem at the last COP because the media helped to get the story out that we were going to actually negotiate a binding international treaty, which would have been lovely, but quite honestly, for the last year before that, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to actually negotiate a binding international treaty. And so there were lots of stories about how this was going to happen in Copenhagen. And then when it didn't happen, there were lots of stories about how Copenhagen was a failure. And I think that was a huge problem because if you had more modest expectations, you actually might have said, well, we got some things done in Copenhagen. It wasn't everything we need to do, of course, but it was something.
And how are they doing this year at covering the conference?
Well, this year, expectations are much lower. I mean, even governments are saying they're much lower. The media is reporting them as much lower. But again, I see the media sort of trying to get what you could call sensational stories. So for example, when the Japanese, at the beginning of this COP, said, we aren't going to do a second budget period of the Kyoto Treaty, that became the huge story. Now, Japan has been saying this for a very long time, that they weren't going to do this unless the United States and China were also bound by some kind of target. So I don't think it actually was news, but it became the big news that Japan was going to destroy the Kyoto Protocol. And I think that's unfortunate because, again, everybody knew this was the case.
And at this conference today, we're talking about public perceptions. What has surprised you in the past few years of research on public perceptions, and how has that affected the way the Pew Center communicates climate science?
Yeah, well, I think we've actually seen an erosion of belief in climate science over the last maybe 5 or 8 years, and there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, one of them is that there was a very concerted, well-funded effort to raise all kinds of uncertainties about the science, and nobody came back, and this is a little bit about how we want to talk about it in the future, and said, you know, the fact that we're uncertain is a reason to act.
Right.
It's not a reason not to act.
Right. And so what has the Pew Center done?
Well,
I know your role is mostly as a think tank,
right,
not a press organization, but how has it affected what?
Yes, well, we actually have been trying to formulate, and we've been working with the American Geophysical Union and other science societies to talk about climate science as a risk issue. People know how to manage risk. They buy insurance against fires and floods. I mean, the probabilities are pretty small, but the damage could be huge, and they understand that. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's managing a risk. And you don't sit back and wait for it to happen.
Right.
You actually do something and buy insurance, which means to me, act on this. And so we're trying to find a different frame for talking about this. When you talk about average global temperatures, the man on the street, it doesn't mean anything to them.
Cap and trade has failed in Congress. Given current sentiment, public sentiment, what can we expect in the U.S.?
Nothing at the national legislative arena, at least for the next couple of years. I mean, I don't see that. I see some efforts in the Congress to prevent EPA from regulating greenhouse gases, and I think some of them might succeed. So nationally, we're not in great shape. States like California are going to continue, which is a bright spot. I think companies are going to continue to do some good things, energy efficiency things. Those are easy, good for the bottom line. Developing new technologies, even though the market is overseas, not in the U.S., because the demand is not there in the U.S., but they're going to continue. So I think we're going to see some sputters for the next couple of years, a lot of defense.
Do you think the EPA is going to be able to take action?
I think the EPA is going to take action on conventional pollutants.
Okay.
And I think that will result in the closure of quite a few old, dirty coal plants.
Okay.
The relatively low price of natural gas means to me that a lot of new plants will be natural gas plants, which at least in the short term will result in reduced emissions. So I actually think our emissions are probably going to go down for those reasons, not because we take action on climate change, because unfortunately I think that's a couple of years away.
Great. Well, thank you, Eileen. I am David Kroodsma with Hub Culture, joined by Eileen Claussen, the president of the Pew Center on Global Climate Change.